Okay, so we thought, since we call ourselves the Sculpture Forum, that we ought to address the issue of monuments. But we've had some email exchange about this, and as you guys know, I am very wary of this hornet's nest. First of all, we are three, in one case, aging white guys. We're all rather privileged, and you know, the bottom line is that the topic of monuments is a lightning rod at the moment, and it's really not a discussion about sculpture. So, you know, we're entering into an arena that I am just very kind of, you know, kind of concerned about what is, how are we entering into it, and how can we talk about it? You know, we have some ideas about sculpture, but this is not about sculpture.
My thought was that the best way to weigh in would be on a really nuts and bolts level, like a shop talk perspective. But the fear is that, which I think is legitimate and moreover could be really helpful, but the question is, who's listening and how do they hear it? I mean, you can't ever speak everything to everybody at once.
Well, I mean, surely the point is that this does not seem to be a moment to discuss monuments in terms of their merits as works of art, if one could consider them as such. It seems irrelevant. You know, they need to be discussed, or they are being discussed in terms of what they represent and what they mean to different people.
It isn't all this activity or whatever it is around public sculpture at the moment is maybe a wake-up call to us, to people who think of sculpture as something private, as you know, throughout history, sculpture has, you know, the artist's studio hasn't been important. It's been the sort of public dimension of sculpture that has, you know, kept it going. That was what it was all about, and it's been forgotten, and it's healthy in a way that people are, you know, looking at sculpture, paying attention to its meaning, and finding in a lot of things that 19th century American sculpture that kept being made into the 20th century is these guys on horses. I've always sort of walked past it without paying much attention to it, rarely knowing who the guy on the horse is supposed to be, and accepting that I didn't like it, or that it wasn't exciting, even though there's plenty of them in New York City. I would sort of go to the Museum of Modern Art in their special sculpture garden. That's where real sculpture is. But now people are looking at the thing in front of the Museum of Natural History. You know, it can mean this thing to somebody and mean something very different to somebody else. People are expressing useful impatience with. Why shouldn't sculpture out in the public realm really mean something to, you know, maybe not everybody, but aspire to communicating with lots of people?
When you say, you know, perhaps it's for us a wake-up call, the implication, or at least what I'm hearing, is, you know, that we sculptors, you, me, Brandt, Jock, have had our heads in the sand or somewhere worse. I mean, and we need to get them out of the sand and look around and get involved in some way. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and you know, your head hasn't been sort of completely in the sand. You began a project in 1970 that involved sticking a sculpture out in the public realm, and you sort of returned to that project recently. You know, sculptors today are aware of this problem, or this sense in which a lot of modern art is too private. But there's, you know, Brancusi's Endless Column is a pretty good public sculpture,
Right.
And you know, that aspiration is still alive.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, I am involved. I am implicated. I have not completely had my head in the sand. It is true. I was involved in Great Britain in more than one large-scale public commissions. And the Cardiff project, I mean, I produced that work, and in my mind, it came to be a kind of memorial or a monument to the 460 some men and boys who lost their lives in a mining disaster not very far from Cardiff. But I never presented it as such. And had I presented it as such, I'm sure that the reaction that I got would have been very different. And that's you know, there's you know, I don't know where to begin on this issue. You know, I really don't. It's just,
why didn't you present the Cardiff project as a
well, because then it I mean, in my mind, then it would have been you know, a work that was carrying a message, and the issue would have been how well it did that, whether it was an appropriate way of doing that, whether it was acceptable. You know, it would have become not something about which people had to somehow or other come to terms as a physical object that had no obvious meaning, carried no obvious message or information. It would have become a question of how efficiently it was doing what you know, and I didn't, I mean, that was just its association in my mind. I didn't necessarily think that it, you know, had I been commissioned to produce a monument to that disaster, or a memorial to those people who had lost their lives, I would have produced that object. I have no idea. You know, it was only in the course of bringing it into being and thinking about where it was going and what it, you know, what it was, that I came to that kind of, first of all, I came to it as a kind of something to do with coal mining, you know, and then that particular, and so on. So, I mean, I think that, you know, and my fantasy was that people would look at it and think about it and, well, you know, maybe perhaps it has something to do with coal mining. I wonder if it could have anything to do with that. You know, that other people might come to the same feelings about it that I had, or something in that region. And if they did that, then it would have a value that it wouldn't have if I told them that it was about this. That was my thinking at the time, and I think that is still my thinking.
I think it's lost at the moment that whatever the occasion and the intention of the maker, that a public artwork, not to say monument, can mean something very different from what was intended. It means something very different. I mean, only a short time later, let alone 50 or 100 years later. And that the thing, when made and later, means so many more things than intended or known at the time. Although they're there, they're real.
And it's an issue partly of the audience changing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole world can change around the thing, but I also think that without the thing being any different than as built, its meaning is far more complex and ambiguous than you know, the commentators in the last 3 weeks are at all aware of. To say that the Shah is white supremacist because it shows a 19th century officer on horseback among foot soldiers, is like, you know, is there any room for the facts of life as it was? You know, I mean, that just seems sheer opportunism. And it bugs the living hell out of me that Holland Cotter was a student of Robert Lowell's, and he's got to know the Lowell poem For the Union Dead, in which Lowell says that the monument sticks in the city's throat, that it accuses the society of the mid-60s of their racism, of their complacency. That's a guy who understands the polyvalency of an artwork. I mean, SAINT-GAUDENS had no idea of that as he worked in so many words, but it's there. And in the mid-60s, it happens. And if people could open their eyes to it, it's happening now. I mean, those guys laid down their lives for what's being protested for now. Laid down their lives, marched into gunfire for it. I mean, to dismiss that today is like, it's just, I've been thinking about this for weeks and it's still like practically speechless on it.
It's a much more crude world than even 30, 50 years ago. And it's a world where things like the Shah Monument might be completely trashed. Lots of big monuments over the history of the world have gotten trashed. We don't even know about.
And I think like an opinion piece like that it undermines.
But how do you get around it, or how is education the trick?
I mean, the only thing I can think of is to like speak up for it as plainly, factually, seriously, with as much good faith as possible, and stick to the artists and the artwork and the subjects. I mean, those men, Shaw and those men, whose names are known. The monument started with the survivors in the regiment, wanted something to remember the assault on Fort Wagner by. And these guys hadn't even gotten paid yet. They refused half pay because they insisted that they get full pay. So they hadn't even paid yet. They went a year and a half unpaid. And they raised like $3,000, which I think is somewhere around, 20% of the cost of the thing, as it developed into something much larger down the road. But it started out as a regimental thing and gradually became a larger project that other people were involved in, and then became a monument to Shaw, with Shaw's name on it. in front of the State House instead of, it would never have happened in South Carolina. I don't know where they would have had a hope of this thing standing, because South Carolinians wouldn't even let the bodies be reburied. The federal government had to put them in a federal cemetery. South Carolinians wouldn't even allow them reburial. And to this day, they're unmarked. So really the monument is a grave marker for everyone who died in the regiment. They're in a common grave, an unmarked common grave for over 100 years now. There's a stone somewhere in Beaufort that says that they're buried here somewhere.
Yeah.
But no one even knows where they are. But they do know that they're all buried together, and that the Shaw family refused to let their son be exhumed and returned to Boston. They said he stays where he is with his men.
Really, there needs to be a much more complex discussion and, really to complete kind of reevaluation of this history before we begin to kind of come to grips with these monuments, I mean, it's almost, my concern is that tearing down the monuments, somehow that can be very satisfying, but it doesn't actually accomplish anything real. It doesn't change anything in the real world in terms of, the systemic racism that exists throughout this culture. I mean, and in a way, I mean, I wish the monuments could stay there in order to keep this conversation going.
Because they accuse our society.
Yes.
Of being what we've been.
Yes, and simply...
And if they don't point the finger...
Yeah, and simply erasing them is kind of like, is kind of getting revenge on the people who erected them, but it's not actually going to accomplish anything very real.
I mean, I think like that Lincoln in Boston that's in the media this morning, that's egregious. I mean, I think it does make a difference to eliminate something like that. It's really wrong-headed in whatever good faith it might have been made at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. But on the other hand, take it away and somehow, what have you done? What have you done by taking that thing away and putting it out of sight?
Yeah.
What have you achieved? Somehow or other, you've lost an opportunity, it feels to me.
Well, you've created a space for something new, and that something new, maybe it's a Richard Serra, maybe it's something else, but that it could be something that's alive and that speaks to a public in a healthy way.
That doesn't shame anyone for starters.
What would that be? What would that be? I mean, I am very skeptical, and why remove that and replace it with something else? Why not put something else against it in relation to it?
Well, yeah, sure. And I mean, that kind of thing is possible. It's maybe a little more complicated, but
I mean, let somebody have a go at reworking it,
Well, that is that is an interesting, this whole business of guys on horses is something that could be reworked.
I mean, Saint-Gaudens was a real artist, exceptional sculptor, very rare, a person who did a number of public works. But most of this stuff is not. So where do we go from here? I mean, what do we do? As sculptors, what do we do? Do we have a role? What is our role? What was our role? What should be our role? Do we have any, I mean, you several times, Jock, mentioned and referred to the economics of the business. I mean, this is the bottom line, isn't it? I mean, and we're all implicated.
It's a general observation, but it comes from Saint-Gaudens' career and the Shaw. He made a number of Civil War and Civil War era pieces, and the Shaw stands out among them because it satisfies conventions and goes far beyond them. I don't think that the Sherman Monument does. I don't think that's a terrific monument to Sherman. And I think that the Lincoln in Chicago is, you know, that's a plaster saint. I think when you've got a conventional job to do and you do it within conventions, which is exactly what society wants at any moment, it's a very astronomically lucky chance that the thing turns out to be anything more than that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
And something clicked in the process of working on the Shaw Memorial that I think was no part of the design to begin with. And day by day, Saint-Gaudens kind of ears open, mouth closed, eyes almost half shut, sort of wrote it out and let this thing become something he had not planned. He was practically watching it happen in front of him. And the thing took 17 years. The veterans were dying. The committee was livid. There was talk of like starting a process against them. And he kept working on the thing after it was dedicated. There were 2 more versions afterward. And like, where could it have gone? Who was going to ask for another Shaw Memorial? But the guy didn't let go.
Our role as sculptors, you know, as quote professionals in this field, in relation to this current debate, and I don't feel we've got anywhere or scratched the surface. I mean, except for your very moving testimony about the Shaw Memorial, which is you know, is wonderful.
But my observation is that it's a black swan. I mean, and that's why it's so precious, invaluable.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yes, be sure. I mean, yes. I wish we had something, you know, meaningful to contribute, and I don't. Apart from what you have been talking about, Brandt, about the memorial in Boston, I don't know that we do. You know, and that's very sad. But I've always you know, pondered and worried and been gnawed at by my role as an artist. What is my social role? What is my function? What is it? What is it that is changed as a consequence of my practice? You know, you know, in terms of how it functions in the world. You know, and it's always, you know, I don't have an answer. There is no answer except, you know, to do no harm as far as possible.
Well, yeah, and to, you know, you're bothered by it and you're thinking about it. And that's, you know, that's healthy.
Well, I've been bothered by it since I was a student. You know,
right.
Because it was difficult for me to decide to be an artist, you know, because I couldn't see how that was useful to people, you know, what good it's going to do.
Yeah, but and there's no easy answer, but it's a question that you know, keeps you alive.
I think it's a matter of historical consciousness too, because it is an unsettled, fraught question that
today
said is unanswerable now.
Yeah.
That we're living through a kind of an interregnum, and we really don't have a position in society.
Yeah.
I keep being reminded of this a line in D.H. Lawrence Essays on American Literature, where he says, "Don't trust the teller, trust the tale." Like, don't listen to that fellow, the artist. He's not going to be frank. He's not going to be forthcoming. you just keep your attention on that thing he's made, and you'll find something true in there.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I mean, people are really looking for something very definite, very sharp-edged, without gray area, black and white, in or out. And I think that the artwork is exactly the wrong place to look for it, and should be.
Well, I wish that were true of public monuments. You know, I mean, I wish that you know, they were the complex, at least the things we're talking about were the complex works of art that could withstand a kind of sustained engagement, and that they were not so easily the victim of decisions about the place in history and the people. You know, I mean, I wish the monuments that are being discussed and threatened were works that one felt one could defend. But it's impossible, isn't it? You can't have a wonderful work of art representing an evil person, can you? I mean, it's a paradox. Can you do that? I mean, is it possible?
I think some of this stuff we have to learn to live with. I mean, maybe not where it is and how it is, but.
No, you're saying what I was trying to say earlier, Brandt. I mean, in a way that, you know, just removing these things, getting them out of sight, satisfying as that would be, I think it's from my perspective anyway, and I mean, as I say, I really question my own right to have any perspective on this.
But, you know, as a matter of intellectual citizenship, I think you really shouldn't absent yourself from looking, thinking, speaking up on a Civil War monument than, you know, like a Tanagra figurine, or you know, or a prehistoric Venus, so-called.
No, I mean, I don't mean to, you know, burden you with my sense of guilt, but I do need to acknowledge the, you know, the ways in which I am coming at this from, you know, from my own, with all my own baggage, and it's necessarily suspect.
I don't grant the suspect quality. I think in a republic, like, every citizen comes forward with what the life he's led. I think there's no in and out there.
There's no in and out there, but coming forward with you know, with whatever life you've led and whatever insights or conclusions it may be leading you to, it is also necessary to acknowledge, in my case, you know, that I am white, I'm a male, and that inevitably carries with it a certain privilege. And that's part of what I am bringing to the table, is that perspective. It needs to be there, it needs to be acknowledged, it needs to be said.
But I think it's, like, what I would posit is, like, there's a kind of like an unheralded instant, the present, in which we each, no matter where we come from whatever angle, we're all, as the living mortals, we're all, not to say family, but we're all a kind of community. And in that instant, like, you know, we all can live for good or ill, you know, we all will do our best at a hazard. And that's got to be legitimate. And I think it has to be recognized. We can't be sorting. You know, we're all here. We didn't ask to, we didn't choose. Here we are in a moment. That's all there is to it. Now everyone gets a fair chance and everyone's got a voice.
But that's not true. That's the basis of this whole debate. Right. Not everyone does have a voice, or not an equal voice.
Right, but no one can be quiet, and no one should be quieted.
No one should be quieted, but people have been quieted. People continue to be quieted.
You know, that's one of these ways that the infantrymen in that Shaw Memorial are more heroic every passing day. And one of these, for me, really telling, delicious stories about the Shaw is that before it got out of the studio, way, you know, many years into it, St. Gaudens had a visitor, another artist, and the guy was kind of non-committal. You know, he looked respectfully. I mean, everyone knew he'd been working on this thing for like 10, 15 years already, right? There was no surprise, no secret. And he's not saying much, and St. Gaudens kind of pokes him, prods him, and finally the artist says, "You sure you want to know what I think? Get rid of the horse." And that was like 1880 something.
Yeah.
Like, you really want this to get better? You really want to make the next step? Lose the horse.
Yeah.
It's really, I think it's really significant that that thinking was going on then.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, and I thought about this a lot, and people also said, lose the angel. Why the angel? Why the sentimentality? Yeah. It's not like we've got a lock on unsentimentality and these people are all, you know, quaint naives. Not at all. And I've thought about this stuff so long, and I think that he was right to keep the horse. It was a matter of fact. And the terror in the horse's face, and the fact that you can see Shaw's grip on the rein and it's pulled back, like he's not letting the horse out of it. I think it's really gripping us as people, you know, that animal terror. And I think the angel also, to say it's only sentimental is to be like really unpsychological. The idea that there's someone at some remove, perhaps from above, who wishes us some kind of peace and wishes us a kind of oblivion, that this terror doesn't go on forever. I think that's really moving, and it would be a terrible loss if he'd yielded to conventional thinking, because that was advanced conventional thinking. If he'd you know, wiped away that angel, I think it would have been such a loss. And I think we have yet to grow into it.